Hi everyone. Have you ever seen someone smile at the chessboard not because they're being friendly, but because they've just realized their opponent walked into a trap? Well, that's exactly what happened when Bobby Fischer sat down against William Addison in round 3 of the 1970 Palma de Mallorca Interzonal, and I'm about to show you why that smile was the beginning of the end. Now, before we dive into the moves, let me give you some context that most people miss about this game. Fischer and Addison had history. Real history. This was their 6th encounter, and Fischer had already won 3 of their previous 5 games, with the last 2 ending in draws. Their first meeting? Way back in 1958 at the US Open. They'd crossed paths repeatedly in US championships after that. But here's what makes this game fascinating, and this is something I don't see talked about enough. Fischer had skipped the 1969 US championship, just didn't show up. And you know who finished 2nd in that championship? William Addison, 7.5 points. So when they sat down in Palma de Mallorca, Addison wasn't some random player. He was coming off strong form. He'd proven himself in Fischer's absence, and he probably felt like he had something to prove. That makes what happens next even more brutal. Fischer opens with pawn to e4. Standard, aggressive, Fischer's favorite. And Addison responds with pawn to d5, the Scandinavian defense. And according to multiple books and interviews from people who were there, Fischer smiled. Not a friendly smile, a "you just made a mistake" smile. Because back in 1970, Fischer considered the Scandinavian defense to be slightly dubious, not losing, but not quite sound either. He was happy to face it. Fischer had studied this opening. He knew its weaknesses, and he was about to demonstrate exactly why he thought it was dubious. Pawn takes on d5. Queen takes on d5. Blacks grab the pawn back, but the queen is out early, and that's going to cost time. Knight to c3, developing with tempo and attacking the queen. Now, most players facing this would play queen to a5 or queen to d6, keeping the queen active and preparing to fianchetto the kingside bishop. These are the main lines, and they give black decent counterplay. But Addison plays queen to d8. The queen retreats all the way back to where it started. Now, to be clear, this isn't a blunder. The position isn't lost. But Addison is making a psychological decision here, not just a chess decision. He knows this loses time, but his plan was to play solid, avoid tactics, and try to neutralize Fischer's preparation. The problem? You can't neutralize Bobby Fischer by playing passively. That's like trying to put out a fire by feeding it kindly. Fischer continues with pawn to d4, claiming the center. Knight to f6 from black, and then bishop to c4. Now here's an interesting point. Today, modern theory considers bishop to c4 slightly inaccurate because it allows black to play bishop to g4, developing with tempo by attacking the queen. But Addison doesn't play that. He plays bishop to f5, developing normally. And here comes Fischer's really strong move, queen to f3. Look at what this move does. It's creating 2 threats simultaneously as the queen attacks the bishop on f5 and the pawn on b7. Both are hanging. But here's the beautiful part that I love about this move, and this is what separates Fischer from ordinary grandmasters. When the queen moved to f3, it looks like white's own pawns on d4 and c2 became weak targets. Black's queen could theoretically grab one of them, right? Wrong. And this is the trap. If black plays queen takes on d4, white simply captures on f5, winning the bishop. If black plays queen takes on c4, white delivers queen to c8 checkmate. Instantly, game over. However, if black tries taking the pawn on c2, thinking they're being clever, white plays queen takes on b7, threatening the rook, and then there are nasty discoveries with the bishop checking along the diagonal. So even though it looks like black has targets, every single one of them is poisoned. This is Fischer's genius, creating an optical illusion where your opponent sees opportunities that don't actually exist. Black has to play queen to c8, defending both the bishop and the b7 pawn, and Fischer plays bishop to g5, offering the c2 pawn again in exchange for rapid development. This time, black accepts and captures on c2, but Fischer plays rook to c1, attacking the bishop and developing the rook simultaneously. The bishop retreats to g6, and Fischer plays knight to e2. And here, pay attention to this. By move 9, all of white's pieces are developed and ready to castle. Meanwhile, black's queenside is completely asleep. The rook on a8, the bishop on c8, the knight on b8, they're all still on their starting squares. This is the practical consequence of that early queen to d8 retreat. Black saved time defending, but lost time developing. And against Fischer, that's fatal. Knight to d7, and white castles. Pawn to e6, and here Fischer makes a critical decision. Bishop takes on f6. Now most players would recapture knight takes f6, keeping the position closed. But Fischer sees something deeper. If black plays knight takes f6, white pushes pawn to d5, and after the exchanges, even if black attacks the bishop, white plays knight to f4, opening the e-file toward black's uncastled king. The bishop can't be taken because of the pin, and black's position collapses. This is why pattern recognition matters at the highest level. Fischer isn't just calculating moves, he's recognizing that with black's king still in the center, opening the position is devastating regardless of material. So Addison instead takes with the g-pawn, and Fischer immediately pushes pawn to d5, trying to rip open lines while black's king is stuck in the center. Black closes with pawn to e5, but white plays bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the king. Black plays bishop to e7, preparing to castle finally, but Fischer develops knight to g3. Pawn to a6, attacking the bishop, bishop to d3, pawn to h4, and pawn to h5. And then bishop to f5, putting pressure on both the knight on d7 and the bishop on g6. Knight to b6, attacking the d5 pawn. And here's where most players would defend the pawn. But Fischer? He plays knight to e4, activity over material. This is Fischers' philosophy in one move. That knight on e4 is eyeing g5, eyeing f6, creating threats that are worth more than the pawn. Knight takes on d5 and rook to d1. Pawn to c6, and Fischer calmly improves with knight to c3. And now look at black's position. That knight on d5 is pinned to the queen. It has to defend critical squares, but it's under unbearable pressure. And in this position, Addison decides to unpin the knight first by moving his queen to b6, while also eyeing that b2 pawn. And here, Fischer does something crazy, something Mikhail Tal would have been proud of. He sacrifices the rook for the knight, recaptures the pawn with tempo on the queen, and now black has two options: either retreat the queen to d1 while at the same time attacking the knight, or simply take the free pawn on b2. Now if queen d1 was to be played, then we would have bishop takes on g6. Fischer removes a defender, and then comes the tactical hammer, knight to c7. And here's where we need to pause and appreciate the geometry of this position, because black has exactly two options: lose the queen or lose the game. If king to f8, knight to e6 is a fork, winning the queen. If king to f7, trying to be safe, queen to b3 check, and whether the king goes to f8 or g7, both are dark squares, and knight to e6 forks king and queen again. But king to d7 is even worse, because then white has forced checkmate in 4 moves: queen to d5 check, king to c8, knight takes on a8 discovered check. The knight can't be taken because the rook gives check, so black's only moves are bishop to c5, then rook takes on c5, queen to c7, rook takes on c7, checkmate. This is systematic destruction, but the actual game continuation was queen takes on b2. Black grabs another pawn, trying to create counterplay. Rook to b1, and the rook can't be taken because the bishop defends it. Queen to a2, and Fischer plays rook to b7. And here, Addison resigned. Why? Because the position is completely hopeless. The bishop on e7 is under massive pressure and can't move because it defends f6. If black tries bishop to d8, white plays bishop takes on g6, pawn takes on g6, and now with the f-file open, knight to f6 threatens unstoppable checkmates on f7, e7, or g6.
The position simply falls apart. There's no defense, no counterplay, no escape. That smile at move 1, that was Fischer recognizing he'd already won the psychological battle. The rest was just proving it on the board. If you liked this analysis, please drop a like, comment your favorite move from the game, and subscribe so you don't miss more deep dives like this one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.